Be thankful for the time you've had. Recognize the fleeting amount of time you have while they're little because they grow up quickly, and then look for those awesome opportunities to celebrate them and enjoy your time together as a family as they get older.
This is Intentionally Ever After. Join intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek for a series of personal conversations and coaching sessions with various people about how living with intention shows up for them.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Intentionally Ever After. Today, I'm very delighted to be joined by my dear friend, Mr. Barry Baird. Barry, welcome.
Welcome. Good morning, Joe.
Thank you. What brings you here today? Will you kindly introduce yourself to folks?
I'd be happy to. So Barry Baird, I live in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. I know Joe quite well because we are paddle tennis partners. If you don't know what that means, you might need to look that up. But no, we play together quite a bit. I also work locally at TD Bank, head of payments capability and delivery at the bank. Prior to that, had several different engagements at PayPal, Bank of America, and BNA, so usually in the customer experience or payment space. Have 4 kids, ranging from getting their master's at 23 to starting high school at 14. They definitely keep me on my toes. Married wife Karen also keeps me on my toes quite a bit.
So it sounds like you're spending a lot of time on your toes these days.
Yes, I am spending quite a bit of time on my toes these days. Lots going on. When you have kids of that life cycle range and age range, and I should probably point out location range, so they span everywhere from Pennsylvania to North Carolina to Alabama. So yeah, keeping up with everybody definitely keeps you busy. A good busy, but keeps you busy.
Barry, what does it mean to live intentionally?
I think to me, that means kind of prioritizing what's critically important to you. Make sure that your actions and your decisions ladder back to those priorities, and kind of try to apply that as a little bit of a guideline on how you navigate your life. I would say to me, that's what I mean when I say to live intentionally.
How do you define something as being critically important to you?
I guess for me, that's just what I want to have in my life, what I want to make sure I grow and evolve within my life. For me, that probably looks a lot like family. So we just talked about the four kids that are a little bit all over the place in life stages and locations at the moment. But to me, it's about optimizing that time. It's about optimizing the direction I can provide them, the support I can provide them, and some of the optionality I can provide them as well. For me, I want to be able to give them different experiences. I want to be able to do different things with them, even if they're kind of some cases kind of interesting and coloring outside of the lines sort of things. But yeah, to me, it's really about how do I prioritize that time? And then what does that mean I need to build from an infrastructure around me perspective that can support that outcome?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so we are talking about optionality and building an infrastructure. What does it take? What do you do to build this infrastructure? What are some of the building blocks here for you?
I guess the more basic ones are you need to make sure you've maintained and established those relationships with your kids, right? It's interesting so just real quickly. So the oldest is Delaney. She's the one getting her master's. Next is Dawson. He's in his senior year at High Point University. The next is Matthew, who's a junior at Kennett High School. And then Aaron, who's a freshman at Kennett High School. So, Matthew and Aaron don't have a tremendous amount of choice necessarily, right? They're at home with me. They're stuck with me. They got to listen to me and interact with me, whether they necessarily love it or not. As your kids grow into adulthood and out of the house, it probably becomes more important that you, number one, established a strong relationship as they were growing up, but that you maintain it. Because, if you're looking to make sure that you have that connectivity and you have built that trust so that if they do need your help, they come to you, or if they do have a problem, they come to you, or frankly, if they have available time to spend that they want to spend it with you. So I think, some of the basics are building that foundation of the relationship and the lines of communication and things of that nature. I think if you kind of open that conversation up a little bit and think about what are some of the other things you could add on to that, again, I think it's having been an advisor to them over time, and hopefully some of what you tried to teach them rang true. I think sometimes you don't recognize that until a little bit later in life. I feel like maybe I was in my mid-20s before I started having that, oh my God, I heard my dad say that conversation, or that kind of mirroring or reflection. Probably happened even more so when I started having kids, because then you recognize, oh, that's why they did this. I feel like some of those epiphanies don't come until a little bit later in life. Again, hopefully you provided some of that, knowledge foundation and decision-making framework foundation for them that they found useful. And then I think maybe to take it out yet another ring is what have you done to be able to support the kind of optionality to be able to have the life experiences that you want to have with your kids? Just as one very small example, but my grandmother turned 100 this past summer, which I'm amazingly blessed that I have a grandmother who's not only 100 but still pretty mentally sharp and still pretty physically active. Actually, it's kind of amazing that we've had a couple of changes lately with the couple folks that have passed. But basically, when my daughter was a junior in college, she had 3 out of 4 great grandmothers still going. So I'd like to say that longevity lasts on the male side of the family as much as it does on the female side of the family, but that wouldn't be accurate. But anyway, we did a beach vacation with the entire cousins and the entire side of my mom's family for her mom's 100th birthday. And one example of what I'm talking about is, not only were we able to go and enjoy this nice weeks-long vacation where everyone was able to pretty much unplug from work and go in and spend the time together with the kids and with the whole family, but I was able to take the 3 boys plus Delaney's boyfriend out on a deep sea fishing trip. And it was really, it was pretty amazing. We were about 70 miles offshore, and we got to go try to catch tuna and marlin and all this crazy stuff that you would never ever get to do in your normal, day to day. Those are the sorts of options and the sorts of experiences that I want to be able to provide them. In some cases, that obviously takes some fiscal decision making in order to make sure that you're prioritizing being able to invest in that kind of experience. But I think it's important. I think that's just an interesting example, because I know that one day, which was an expensive day, but in the larger scheme of things, you think about, okay, well, it was just one day. I have heard each of the kids talk about that, many, many times since. And in fact, ironically, we saved the tails off the fish that we actually caught. And I guess by the time this airs, they will have gotten them, so it won't be a big shock. But we saved the tails that they got, which was quite a project on its own, trying to drive home in the car with, portions of unrefrigerated fish in the back of the car. It was a little bit of a creative problem-solving process anyway. But we then had to save them for months and months. In fact, I think you might have even seen them hanging off the outside of my house trying to dry over the last 3 or 4 months. And so we've now mounted them, and they're going to be Christmas presents. So it's kind of a way to continue to remind and expand on that experience. But I think being able to provide those kind of outcomes for my kids are important.
Well, it sounds like for you weren't able to maybe appreciate some of the lessons that you got until you were, a parent or older, but if your kids are appreciating some of the things more recently, and if they're not, you're going to give them a physical reminder this Christmas.
Yep. That's right. There's a method to that madness.
No, I think that's great. I think it's great, kind of forced reflection of sorts, right? And it certainly isn't like they had a bad time at all, right? These are pleasant memories that you're building over the years. And it sounds like these are very key building blocks to those relationships, so that when they are out of the house at some point, that they will want to come back to you as an advisor or what have you, but they will want to still spend some time with you. What are some other things that are important to you in building / maintaining these relationships with your kids in particular?
I think, to me, I tend to be the one who's always very focused on trying to maintain, the harmony and the balance, if you will, across those relationships, which isn't always easy. I didn't cover this at the outset, but we're a blended family. So the 2 oldest are my biological children, and the 2 youngest are my wife's biological children. And we've been married now for almost 10 years. But when you think about where that started, where we had to evolve that relationship, wasn't always easy. And especially when you've got blended families, that of course means that there's other extensions of that family that are non-traditional. And so I think working through some of those challenges, understanding some of those challenges, what does it mean that you've got kids that have to be back and forth between households? Or what does that mean that you've got, the step parent dynamics versus the biological parent dynamics? And I think there's a lot wrapped up in that. But I think it's clearly something that we've been focused on. We frankly still focus on. And Karen and I work on this all the time. It's not always an easy solve, but I do think that, again, it goes back to building that foundation and building those relationships where I think when you have enough of that common ground and enough of that common experience, it starts to knit itself together over time. And I think that's a journey we've been on for going on a decade. And it's a journey that I'm sure will continue in some way, shape, or form for the rest of our lives. But it does add some interesting dynamics that they got to think about. And at least for me, and really for Karen as well, neither one of us were children of divorce. So kind of having to, in some cases, almost work through that without having necessarily an immediate applicable proxy or an immediate kind of model to jump to. So in some ways, I think we felt like we were navigating a little bit on the fly, which was why it was important that we communicated to each other and important that we stayed closely connected. Doesn't mean we always agreed. We still don't when it comes to all the different aspects and decisions within that. But at least you're working with your partner and you're trying to make sure that you understand their point of view so that you can factor that in as much as possible.
So it sounds like it's crucial for you to be really clear about what matters to you, given all the different cast of characters here in this blended family.
It is a cast of characters, and yes, I would agree with you. and there's a lot of different dynamics to that as well, right? Like if you look at the two younger ones, their biological dad lives 6.5 hours away. And so that's a very different dynamic in itself, where a lot of that relationship is remote. The pandemic's added even another additional curveball with that one, right? Because even when we were able to get together and to see their dad, Matthew and Aaron's dad, we weren't able to do that the same way for the past 2 years, for sure. So it's been interesting to navigate that piece in particular. But it does become critical that you're kind of taking the different perspectives into account, the different dynamics of the two sets of children and what those look like. Because in my situation, my ex lives 15 minutes away, not even. And so that's a much more, I guess, balanced share of time and probably balanced share of influence, as opposed to with Matthew and Aaron, not as much. So just trying to take those things into account. And even like now, how do you take into account that, when Delaney's in town, we're going to see her for a week or two a year at most, right? She's in Alabama. It's quite a hike. You've got a little bit of a hybrid with Dawson being home from college or not. And then you've got full-time with Matthew and Aaron. So it's just, and those dynamics change as they evolve and grow through their life stages. Those dynamics change, of course. Yeah, that's what I meant by keep you on your toes. You're always having to consider the situation as it evolves. And it evolves, seems like, really quickly with form.
Do you have a core message or mantra internally that you try to come back to and simplify things for yourself? It's like, you know what, at a minimum, I got to insist upon this when things get hectic or complicated or complex, especially, you enter the holidays into these things and people come in and out. And what do you try to maintain as your grounding statement, if anything?
That's a good question. To me, I want there to be a certain amount of, and this can be hard. It's hard, I think, for anyone with kids these days, much less a blended family with four. But I think making sure that you are prioritizing at least some period of very focused time. Put down your phone, get off the video game, cut off the TV, whatever it is. Like, we're going to have some focused time with all six. And that's just because that's pretty rare these days, quite frankly. We were very blessed to be able to do it this past summer because we all got together again for Grandma's 100th. But that time is rare and, frankly, going to get more rare as they grow up and out of the house. So I think, to me, kind of that core is, each time we get together, we want to make sure we have at least some really focused experience with just the six of us.
So given the limited resource of time, What for you has been one change in habit that has had an exponential payoff?
And this has probably been somewhat recent. I don't know. When you're 50, I guess you define recent. 5 years is pretty recent. I guess I would have said something very different when I was 20. But I'd say I made a fairly intentional decision to strike a better work-life balance. And that was probably when I was coming from PayPal back to TD. We'd had some life events occur. My wife went from a very demanding job as an internist with a whole huge slate of patients to suddenly not being able to work. And so when I was at PayPal, I spent the majority of the time on the road. In fact, I would normally even, the office was a couple hours away. So during the week, I would usually front end the week, staying overnight there just to avoid the 4-hour commute back and forth. And so when Karen had her health issue, I suddenly wanted to spend considerably more time at home and not be gone nearly as much, make sure that I was there to support the rest of the family. She went through some pretty significant fatigue periods and was trying to work on recovery. So for me, a pretty big change was to say, hey, I've got to intentionally strike a better balance, a better work-life balance. And I mean, I think that has had some pretty significant changes in outcome. Obviously one of them was going to work for a different company that was closer, not doing the overnight travel on a weekly basis like I was doing. And frankly, just not to say I'm not, I'm usually up and at my desk at 7, if not before, in the morning, and usually there until at least 6 in the afternoon or evening. But I think the 24/7 always on mentality that I probably had previously, I had to dial back a little bit. And again, look, there's ways for folks to reach you if it's critical. That doesn't mean I need to be, sitting there constantly scanning it and watching it and interacting with it. And so trying to be a little bit more present in trying to strike a better balance about kind of when you're on versus when you're not on, and when you're focused on personal and family time. I think that was a pretty important pivot. Probably one I frankly waited a little too long to make. It probably shouldn't have taken some, cataclysmic event for me to recognize that. And it doesn't necessarily mean I'm always good at it. I'm sure if we had Karen sitting next to me, she'd probably tell you there's plenty of times I'm not present and we're sitting at the table together and I'm distracted by XYZ. I'm sure she would say that, but I think it's definitely something I've gotten better at.
Right. It's one thing to be physically there, which it sounds like you are a lot more of, right? You certainly had the incentive.
Oh, definitely.
You changed jobs. Certainly, I'm assuming the pandemic had a lot to do with you being at home more frequently as well. And so it sounds like physically you're a lot more present, which makes it a lot easier to be mentally more present when you're physically in the same room, at least, right?
100%. Or if there's something that comes up that needs to get attended to, you're there, right? And so the decision one was 4.5 years ago. To your point, since March of 2020, gosh, it's crazy to think, by the way, that we've been saying last year, which makes it sound like a much shorter period of time. We're on the precipice here of not even being able to say that anymore, which makes it sound as long as it actually has been. But anyway, since March of 2020, I've been working full time from home. So yeah, there's definitely no shortage of physical proximity any longer. That might be why you and I enjoy getting out and playing some paddle tennis on occasion, to get ourselves a little bit of separation, because we're in the same house 24/7 now. That if I contrast that to 5 or 6 years ago, where the majority of the time was not in the same house, even if I'm talking about like sleeping, yeah, it's been a pretty big shift in that regard.
What have you said no to that has made a significant impact in your life?
I could weave that one into the last answer to an extent. Ironically, when I went to go to TD, I got a pretty significant counter to stay, which I said no to. If I was answering just a fiscal question, it definitely had an impact on my life, maybe not necessarily to the better. But no, I mean, I think, and it was a hard one because I really, really, really loved working at PayPal. That was a pretty tough move for me in a lot of ways. Not that, I mean, TD's a great culture. It's a great company, and I know some really good people there that I'm lucky enough to continue to know today. But yeah, the exit at PayPal was challenging because I just had a really strong team there and a bunch of really good peers and friends. But yeah, when they countered, and I really did have to kind of weigh it because it was a pretty significant one. But for the reasons I said earlier, I thought it was important to go ahead and make that move and make some life changes that were going to make it a little easier to navigate at home. So yeah, that'd probably be a pretty big one.
Yeah, I think that counts as being pretty significant. What area in your life feels just about perfect?
Is any part of your life perfect? That depends on how you define perfect, I suppose.
Mine? Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's all perfect.
It's not about me. This is about you. This is about you.
See, that's why you coach us. Yeah, so that we can learn from the perfection. If you define perfect as in like I don't spend any time worrying about it, like that's kind of perfect. Honestly, when I'm playing sports, when I'm playing paddle tennis or when I'm out mountain biking, whatever, I kind of I go as hard as I can all the time, and I don't really worry about it. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the competition of it. I enjoy the physical exercise of it. It's a pretty big release for me, probably that allows me to compartmentalize and eliminate stress. I often pay for it the next day, sometimes the next couple, especially as I'm getting older. But it's perfect in the moment. If you were to define perfect as like what would I not trade for anything, I would say it would be family. They'd probably laugh if they heard me say that because I feel like I'm almost always on one of the kids to improve something or to work harder on something or to try a different approach to something. But really, they're all pretty amazing and they're all pretty amazingly different. They kind of each have their own innate superpower, but they have their own gaps too. So that's why, when I say perfect, I don't mean easy or even unflawed. I just mean I wouldn't swap them out for anybody else. Let's put it that way.
I love that you have multiple definitions of perfect, and based on these definitions, you have multiple areas that you would define as perfect.
Yeah, I would say so.
Who is someone you admire, and what do you admire about them?
Can I give you like a cheesy, easy, famous one, and then a personal one?
Absolutely. Yeah, I welcome both of them.
So I know this isn't on video, so the listeners won't see the oodles and oodles of Virginia Tech things I have behind me. But if I had to pick a famous, easy one, I'd probably say Frank Beamer. If you're a college football fan at all, you know who Frank Beamer is. But he basically coached a couple of schools, I guess most notably Murray State before he went to Virginia Tech. And I think he came to Virginia Tech, if I'm not mistaken, in 87, 88. And coached until about 2015, 2016, somewhere in there. One of the most successful coaches of all time in college football, literally grew up in a very small town. I believe it was Hillsville out in Virginia. This is someone who came from very humble beginnings, actually played at Virginia Tech in college, overcame some personal adversity in his life, was actually a pretty significant burn victim at one time. Overcame that, kind of overcame the humble hill country of Virginia beginnings, went to college, played at Tech, and then eventually went back to coach at Tech. I've met him. My folks have met him. He's very humble. He's very approachable. During his time at Tech, he built a staff like he would build a family. He and his defensive coordinator, who he brought with him, stayed with him his entire tenure while he was at Tech. He challenged the model. He did some things that normal head coaches considered to be beneath him. So I'll give you an example. Like he was the one who really started to focus with special teams. Special teams used to be an area where they would basically just say, okay, let me hand this off to a coordinator who would specialize just in that area. And he decided, you know what, I'm not going to put my third and fourth string guys on special teams. I'm going to put my best hands guys on special teams. I'm going to put my fastest, strongest, tallest, whatever on special teams. And he actually personally coached that group. And as a result, Virginia Tech had like the most dominant special teams. They had more block kicks. They had more kicks returned for touchdowns than anyone else in college football for a couple decades. And a lot of that, now everyone else kind of figured this out and eventually started to pivot the model as well. So his differentiation, his initial gap closed over time. But it was just an example of how he thought about it completely differently. And he tried to solve the problem very differently and to great success. So that'd be my famous one. My not so famous one, and I'm not going to mention him by name so I can go into a little bit more detail that he hasn't told me I can go into. So I figure if I don't mention his name, then I'm clear. One of my good friends from Virginia Tech, ironically, was in the Corps Cadets with me at Tech, overcame some pretty significant obstacles in his life, including one where he actually almost got thrown out at Tech. So we were in the Corps Cadets, which Virginia Tech and Texas A&M are the only two largely civilian college populations in the country that also have a fully dedicated Corps cadet. So a group of students that are fully in uniform every day, they PT, they actually go to ROTC, or can choose to be Corps only, but they have the option to go through to get a commission when they graduate, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a friend of mine who was pretty hardcore, great grades, great physical fitness scores, everything else. Made a bit of a dumb mistake, but one that didn't seem like the punishment quite fit the crime. But anyway, he was stripped of his ability to get a commission while he was, I think this was a sophomore or junior in college. Could have pretty easily at that point. I mean, being in the Corps was not easy. There was, when you compare that to the average college kid who gets to roll out of bed at 11 o'clock on a Saturday, or hell, just about any day. We were up in the morning PTing. It was fairly aggressive, had to be in uniform, had to be all together. We had band practice. We had physical training. We had all kinds of extra stuff that we did above and beyond what average college students had to do. So he had already passed the point where he had a commitment to the Navy at this point, but he stayed in to be enlisted. So no commission, stayed in to be enlisted. And he said, you know what, if I got to stay in and be enlisted, then I'm going to be the most badass enlisted guy I could be. And he went on to become a Navy SEAL and was for many, many years. In fact, I got to know several other friends within that community from him. So seen him overcome some significant obstacles and still reach pretty great heights. He's dealing with another obstacle now, and that his wife has been battling some pretty significant cancer for several years. But I've seen him navigate all of this, and he's always an extremely patient husband, extremely patient father and teacher. Anytime I need my kids to really understand some difficult concept, he's the guy I would want them teaching, because he's very thorough and he's very thoughtful. And he does tons of research on things that people bring to him, and he will literally give you his shirt off his back. So I think some combination of watching him overcome adversity in his life, but face it all with a patience and a willingness to give of himself, I think makes him pretty damn admirable. Just all that on top of the fact that he served his country for as long as he did in some pretty significantly dangerous roles. But I think he's a pretty impressive individual.
Yeah, pretty fantastic character to have in your life. It sounds like during formative years for you as well.
Yep.
And sounds like he continues to be a really good friend.
Yep, to this day. In fact, I was supposed to see him yesterday. I think I'm going to see him later today instead. But yeah, we're still pretty close, and he continues to be an amazing human being.
What do you imagine some people admire about you?
I think I would say, other than our paddle game, obviously, I think I would have to say, probably I have a very strong work ethic. I think I try to approach leadership in a very balanced fashion. And I try to be thoughtful about giving my team enough oxygen that they're able to grow and develop and, get credit for their efforts and their work, while still being there when they need the escalation help or they need something to get pushed particularly hard. So I try to be very open door listener, very accessible. And then I hope they would say also considerable passion around diversity. So there's some groups that I lead at TD Bank, most specifically a Women in Leadership Allies group that I lead. And so I think, to me, it's always been a pretty big focus of mine that if I'm surrounding myself with people that look like me and sound like me, I got blind spots all over the place. I might as well be talking to myself, as opposed to if I can engage a group. And I've also thought about this in terms of how I build my own teams. Like, I'm looking for folks that have a variety of background, that have a variety of life experience, that have a variety of professional experience. That can take all kinds of different forms. That's not necessarily just a gender thing or an age thing or a race thing. It could be anything. I think having those differing perspectives in the room and understanding what those wants and needs are. I've spent a lot of time in a product development capacity or in a customer experience capacity. At this point, it's probably 2/3 of my career. You need to have that horizontal view, and you need to be able to take those differences into account in order to build a customer experience that's going to resonate with a broader range of your customers, or to make sure that you haven't created something that is just totally either out of bounds or just unattractive to a particular group. It's not a value proposition that's going to resonate. So there's important, it's the right thing to do socially, sort of reasons for that. But then there's also, frankly, economic reasons for that as well, right? If you're building in a echo chamber, you're not doing the best thing for your company either. So that there's all kinds of reasons to do the right thing when it comes to diversity. That's something I'm pretty passionate about. So I would hope that's something that would come up when people were thinking about me.
All right. For this next phase, we're at the end of this year, so maybe we can frame it in terms of resolutions or what have you. What area of your life do you see increasing intentionality in?
I think I need to increase some intentionality about taking care of myself would probably be the biggest one. Yeah, without a doubt. I need to lean in. I've actually just started doing some resistance training again for the first time in, I can't remember how long, maybe 25 years, 30 years. So I've always been a big cardio person. I think I mentioned at the outset, a lot of cycling. I used to do some racing, road bike racing, mountain bike racing. And so cardio was always a huge focus. And I guess, especially with the mountain bike racing, I guess there was some strength that just came along with the training. It was its own resistance training. Now that I'm not cycling as much, I've kind of still maintained a cardio bent, but I haven't really maintained the strength training piece. And I think that's something that as I'm getting older, I'm feeling the need to do more and more. As I'm playing tennis and my shoulder's aching, and I'm like, why is that? It's probably because you're not balancing it with some other resistance training, as an example. So I think that just trying to improve on some habits and ruts, I think we've probably all fallen into while we've been squirreled away during the pandemic. In some ways, I'm looking forward to coming back from the pandemic because I want to try on all my suits and my work clothes and make sure I get a gauge for, okay, I have to do at least this much to get back into not having to go buy a whole new wardrobe. But yeah, I think one of the advantages of being home is that we've had more time. We've all largely eliminated our commutes. And look, the return to work, I don't think it's going to look like it did before anyway. I think that's going to look significantly different. But for the last almost 2 years now, we suddenly got an injection of time back in our life, not having that commute. Now, some of that just means we're getting logged into emails earlier, but hopefully some of that people have taken advantage to take a little more time for themselves to do a little bit more, go to the gym in the morning before work or get that run in or do your weights. And I think it's something that I've kind of inconsistently done in spurts over that period of time. I want to get to a better place where I'm doing that all the time, just from a heart health perspective or from just a mental health perspective. I think there's a lot of benefits to that when you can do it more regularly. And so I need to get back into a better continuity around that. I would say it's going to be a big focus for me next year.
Well, I think there's a natural tendency around that for many people, regardless of if there's a global pandemic happening, right? New Year's resolutions, things like that. But yeah, I think the pandemic has put some additional weight behind that, pun intended.
Unrealized.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with listeners to our conversation?
Anything at all? We're going to any category here now?
I mean, yeah, in the name of intentionality, but anything you'd like to bestow or any wonderings, thoughts you've been having?
I might be taking a little bit of a left turn here, but so quick story, since I'm assuming this is going to air after it happens and I'm further assuming success. So if I call you back and say, take this part out, you'll know it didn't go well. So
Agreed.
We were in Alabama 3 or 4 weeks ago going to visit my daughter, and we hadn't been down there. She'd been up here, but we hadn't been down there for really since the pandemic. And so got to spend quite a bit of time with her and her boyfriend while we were there. And at one point, he pulls Karen and I aside and asks for permission to ask Delaney to marry him. So after we had a bit of a debrief on some of what that might mean and what that timing might look like, we, of course, said yes, because his name's Reed. Reed's a great kid, comes from a great family. And so I was thinking that this was probably in the March, April timeframe. He told me he needed to put some money away to make this happen. So I was assuming this was no time soon. Then all of a sudden, I guess he then goes to talk to his parents about it and finds out that there's an heirloom family ring opportunity, or a family stone opportunity, I should say. Long story short, he suddenly decides he wants to do this like now. Like, this is burning a hole in his pocket. He's doing this now. So he's coming up here next week to do the on-the-knee request. And we're all assuming, of course, that this is going to go positively, because my daughter's pretty much already told me that he's the one. So I don't foresee any storm clouds there. Long story short, we're now pivoting to an engagement party, which is the day after my parents' engagement. So if it doesn't go well, it's going to be their engagement party, but assuming it goes well. And so I'm putting together like all these pictures, and I'm putting together all these kind of experiences for this digital frame that her mother and I are kind of working on together. So as I'm going through all these pictures over the years, it has kind of made two things jump out at me. One of them is, wow, do they grow up really quickly? I mean, I'm looking at pictures of her that, again, 5 or 6 years ago doesn't feel that long ago in the overall continuum of your life. But when you look at your kids, you're like, good Lord. In fact, one of them, Matthew, was in, and Matthew's like taller than I am now. He's 17 and he's like 6'1", and I'm looking at a picture of him from 3 years ago, and he looks like a little kid, like literally looks like a little kid. He looks smaller than Aaron. And so as I'm going through and kind of putting this together, it kind of makes you realize, first of all, be thankful and be blessed for the experiences that you've had, because I look through these pictures and I'm like, wow, we've got to do a lot of really fun stuff together. And I like to go back and look through that every now and then. The Google Photos, if you have Google Photos, the Google Photos reminders that pop up and like, hey, 4 years ago this week, that's like one of my favorite things is to scan through this, because it reminds me of all the cool stuff that we've gotten to do. But it also reminds you of, man, that is a finite amount of time that you have. And it's a finite amount of time that you have to influence that outcome, right? By the time they leave the house, they're pretty fully baked, hopefully, or pretty close to it anyway. In fact, frankly, they're really probably fully baked mostly by the time they hit middle school or high school. But so it definitely jumped out at me. Wow, a lot of great stuff to be thankful for. My gosh, does it move quickly? And then maybe the third thing, just to tie it back to the optionality piece from before. Like, we're now planning this big get together, and I don't know when the actual wedding's going to happen, because gosh, for all I know, the supply demand back up in the last 2 years might mean they're not getting married for a while. So this is kind of, it's an opportunity to throw something for them. They're going to have a lot of family and friends there. Some of the family that's not doing as well. If the actual wedding's a couple of years out, who knows what that's going to look like in 2 years. So I'm really glad that we have the optionality to go ahead and do that and throw that for them and enjoy that time together while everybody's home. Because, she's got family and friends that are home from school that are her friends, that are her contemporaries. And then she's going to have a lot of family and friends that are our contemporaries, but that have known her since she was, knee-high to a grasshopper, as my grandmother would say. So it's just, again, really important that we have the ability to be able to pivot and provide that kind of an experience. So I'm really looking forward to the party. Hopefully I'm going to say it went amazing, because it will be in the rearview mirror by the time this is live.
I was going to say, yeah, now tell us how it was, because, this will have aired after the fact.
It was amazing. My tux fit. That's right. My tux fit and everything. But yeah, so I guess the takeaways, the headline message for that is, be thankful for the time you've had, recognize the fleeting amount of time you have while they're little, because they grow up quickly, and then look for those awesome opportunities to celebrate them and enjoy your time together as a family as they get older.
Well, thank you for creatively tying all the themes back together so succinctly and nicely like you did there. Makes my job a heck of a lot easier on these episodes. But I appreciate your time, appreciate your friendship as well. Thank you in particular for coming on and sharing your perspective, your stories, and I look forward to seeing you soon, I'm sure, out on the paddle court again.
Thanks, Jeff. This was fun.
This has been Intentionally Ever After, hosted by intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek. If you would like to have your own intentional conversation with Joe on or off the air, visit intentionallyEverAfter.com. Thanks for listening.